What's up, everybody? 2 hours of GoJo and Golic coming your way this morning, which is, I'm sure, exactly what GoJo and Senior want to do this morning. It's going to be more of like an Irish support group right off the top, okay? Notre Dame falling to Ohio State last night. Thoughts and prayers, you guys. Final Four, we're going to look ahead to championship weekend with NFL analyst Joe Thomas, plus the coaching carousel, Ben Johnson, heading to the Windy City. We will break it all down. All that more coming up on GoJo and Golic right now.
Morning here. We got a great show for everybody. As always, download, subscribe, rate, and review it. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out live Monday through Friday here, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. As Jesse mentioned, Joe Thomas going to be stopping by. Jason Fitz, as he always does on a Tuesday, going to help us look back at the weekend. And Dad, Jesse, we have to start where everyone knows we have to start today. Ben Johnson taking the Chicago Bears job exactly the way that I predicted in the lead up to this, the most obvious pairing on planet Earth, and obviously not where we're going to start today, as we will have plenty of time to break down that pairing here. Aaron Glenn, it sounds like, is in Florham Park today, and the Jets plan on not letting him leave. But, Dad, I wish I could be anywhere other than where I am now, sitting in this hotel full of the sads after last night's victory by Ohio State. And, hey, congratulations to the Buckeyes. They are your first ever 12-team playoff national champions. For Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, Dad, their first championship in his tenure there. Ohio State's first championship in a decade since the Urban Meyer win in the 2014 CFP run. They beat Notre Dame in this game, Dad, in a game that felt like they were going to beat them pretty handily. Notre Dame climbs back into this, and ultimately, with a final score of 34-23, they cruise comfortably after the dagger around the 2-minute mark, the 56-yarder to Jeremiah Smith, the star freshman wide receiver that capped the day. Dad, a great day for Ohio State and Ryan Day. I certainly want to get to a lot of the accomplishments, the great story that this season was for the Buckeyes. But now that I can drop the analyst thing for a second, holy hell did that suck yesterday. How are you feeling right now? Because I feel completely bombed out and depleted at this point as a human being.
Yeah, I mean, listen, especially the way the game started out, right? It started out way better than when you and Jake played in the national title game in 2013. 4 minutes into that game, we were like, oh, my God, this is going to be a long night. Notre Dame takes the opening drive, goes 18 plays, 75 yards, chews up 9 minutes and 45 seconds, and goes up 7-0. Clearly,
we were on cloud nine after those plays, after that drive, clearly, Dad. We could not be stopped after that drive. Drunk on power, eating up 10 minutes of the first quarter with grade A American beef all along the way. And as you mentioned, Riley Leonard just selling out his body for the team.
Yeah, he did. Right, that was the Riley Leonard drive. I thought, my God, he's going to need an ice bath after that drive alone. But then Ohio State scores the next 31 points, and it was deja vu all over again to watch a team roll up to a big lead on Notre Dame. But this time Notre Dame fought back. They fought back in the fourth quarter. A couple of scores, a couple of 2-point conversions. They got to within 8 points. Another touchdown and conversion. Away. They had a chance. 2:38 to go. They have Ohio State third and 11. You know, there's a lot to talk about in the game, but you talk about plays. You know, plays. There are 5 or 6 handful of plays. You know, a game that really you look at, and the ball's on Ohio State's 34-yard line. It's 3rd and 11 with still a couple minutes to go in the game. I think 2:38 to go in the game, and Notre Dame gets to stop there. They get the ball back. They have a chance to score, 2-point conversion, tie it up. Long pass, Notre Dame's in man coverage. Jeremiah Smith, 56-yarder to Notre Dame 10. You know, you got the 2-minute timeout. Notre Dame burns their last timeout, field goal, and that's the ball game. So, I mean, there's a play here and there where it looked like Ohio State was going to run away with it, that Notre Dame had their chances and just couldn't come up with the play.
Can I tell you that the only thing worse than watching your team lose in the national championship in a group full of Notre Dame grads, your family, friends, former teammates, is what my dad just did there the entire night. Everyone, as it is going wrong, and my darkest moments came at the end of the first half, where I thought this thing was going to spiral fully out of the way. I'm just hoping Ohio State doesn't hang 50 on us at that point. I'm not talking to anyone. I'm not eating anything. I'm not drinking anything. The only thing that makes that situation worse is everyone coming up to you and go, well, at least we had that moment in the first quarter that was different than when you guys got your ass kicked in 2012. That makes you feel real good, where you're going through one of your new worst memories, being reminded by everybody else of your old worst memory of the last time you were on that stage. So I appreciate all you guys for that, Dad. And I said this morning I was coming in and I was going to look for a scapegoat in all this. And I do think it's still going to be you. My father rolled up to the game last night wearing exactly what he is wearing right now. College football playoffs Rob Lowe with zero Notre Dame gear on in the booth as we watch this game here. Dad, how do you plead right now? Because I feel like I have to vibe check you coming off that egregious mistake.
Well, listen, I mean, she's in the air, so she's not listening right now. I blame your mother.
Don't do it.
Listen.
Oh, wow.
I'm staying in Scottsdale right now. Okay, that's where we're at. Not at Notre Dame, where all my Notre Dame gear is. I don't have any Notre Dame gear in Scottsdale. I had to do the Buffalo-Baltimore game Sunday night. Oh, that little playoff game, divisional game. I didn't land.
Okay.
I did not land in Atlanta. I got to the hotel at 4:50, between 4:15 and 4:30, and the game starts at 7:30. I was struggling just to get ready, and your mother purchased this shirt for me. Now, she could have purchased any piece of Notre Dame paraphernalia, and she purchased this. I hate to throw her under the bus. I hope she never hears this, because that'll be the end of me. I hope we let's cut this out and not send this out on social media. But this is what she had laid out for me. So this is what I wore. That's been going on this way for 38 years. I wear what she puts out, especially on the road. So listen, put two and two together. I hate to do it, but do I have to throw your mother under the bus?
I don't think you have to. I think
that.
My father, the ultimate pull the thumb person, accept responsibility for your actions, immediately launching not just anyone under the bus, but his loving wife and my dear mother under the bus after a loss that no doubt falls squarely on my father's shoulders based on his wardrobe choice. So, Dad, I hope you can live with yourself after that. It's for us, obviously, a unique brand of devastation that unfortunately we're familiar with. We will certainly get to some of the pivotal. Go ahead, Dad. How was your assessment?
He's trying to backtrack now. I know that's
what you want to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's trying to backtrack about the shirt thing.
No. This is about completely something else. This is well, it's kind of, you blame me because I didn't wear a Notre Dame shirt. I'm always amazed at the superstitions that people have. Right, Sean and Liz McNeil, you're Sean, great friends of ours, great friends of yours. You room with Sean,
at Notre Dame, former Notre Dame lacrosse player, my freshman year roommate, him and his wife Liz, who is a national champion women's soccer player, the only one in our group to have won a national championship that was in the booth with us. So they were both at the game here. And yes, Dad, there was a lot of moving around based on how Notre Dame had done and everyone holding their place in the booth when they were asked to.
Exactly. I mean, so Sean Rogers and Liz are sitting next to one another, obviously. And it's during Notre Dame's run of scoring, and Liz gets up she has to go to the bathroom, and Sean's like, sit down. You can't go. And I look, I'm like, are you serious? She has to go to the bathroom. He's like, no, she can't go to the bathroom. So Sean Rogers, throw him in the list of people who have that superstition like you do.
Listen, we at one point when Notre Dame was beginning their second half rally had two random guys walk into our suite. I'd never seen them before in my life. And as Notre Dame pulled it to within a score, one of them looked me dead in the eyes and said, not done yet. And then we looked down a second later, they were a couple suites away from us. And my friend Dane yelled at them to come back because they had been there during the rally. So we reinvited these two strangers that had mistakenly wandered into our suite back into it in an effort to try and help the Notre Dame rally that clearly fell short. So, Dad, it's just about doing all you can here. As a fan, you don't understand because, again, you are so wired as athlete brain, while I have a little more of the fan stuff in me, to understand that when you have an opportunity to impact the game the way we potentially did there, you've got to hold steady. It's like being in the movies when you're in a car on the end of a cliff and everyone's in there trying not to move and just trying not to let this thing teeter over the edge. That's all we were trying to do in this game. Unfortunately, we were fruitless in that endeavor. So we'll get to the key moments of this game, I have a feeling, in the second segment coming up here, because there were, I think, 3 key moments Notre Dame fans are going to look back on as the things that will keep them up at night after this loss, and things that felt atypical, uncharacteristic of this team and this Marcus Freeman coach team in particular over the course of this season. But Dad, let's give the Buckeyes their just due, man. We mentioned their first natty in 10 years. Will Howard starts this game with a CFP championship record, 13 straight completions without a drop. OSU went 9 of 11 on third down and overall. And Ryan Day, who everyone wanted to fire after the Michigan loss this season, everyone was talking about and slandering, now gets to lift this trophy after an unbelievable run through the playoff. They beat up on Tennessee. They stunned number 1 ranked Oregon. They beat number 5 Texas, and then number 7 Notre Dame to ultimately hoist the trophy in this one. And don't look now, Ryan Day now 70-10 in his first 80 games among coaches with at least 80 wins. He's second in career winning percentage by only Walter Camp, the guy they named the freaking All-American team after. So I'd say decent company, Dad, for a guy in Ryan Day who now instantly goes from vilified to canonized forever as one of the names around Ohio State that has continued this tradition. And if for them, a decade's a long time relative to the amount of talent that comes through that campus, what the expectation is there, and especially when you had gone 3 straight years losing to your rival. We knew the fires were rising there because that creates some discomfort. The door should have been shut on that conversation before. We said that yesterday, so this is not prisoner of the moment stuff. But now Ryan Day going out and capping it like this, I have a feeling ends any of that ill will that was towards him coming off the Michigan loss.
First, and we did say it. Hell, we said it, a while ago. The thought of firing Ryan Day because of the 3 losses to Michigan and the record that he has outside of it, to me, is ridiculous. But I'm not part of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. Notre Dame has their own, basically, and USC. For me, I know Michigan, it was for you. But I thought it's crazy. So you're going to bring in a coach to beat Michigan. But that's kind of what goes on in that series. I'll say it again. The 12-team playoff probably saved Ryan Day's job, because if this is still the 14 playoff, if this is still the 14 playoff, Ohio State and Notre Dame aren't in the Final Four. So this isn't the championship game you're going to get. They would not be. Ohio State certainly wouldn't. Notre Dame, I don't think, would have been. And so the season would have ended for Ohio State after the 13-10 loss to Michigan, and the fires would have had time to just burn. And it would have been around Ryan Day, and it would there's a good chance it would have cost him his job. And here they go to make an incredible playoff run, 4-game playoff run where they look unbelievably dominant against Tennessee and Oregon. Texas makes a game out of it. Notre Dame was being dominated, but then they kind of made a game out of it, got within 1 score, and 1 big play took that away. And they deserve to be the national champs. They're an unbelievably talented team. We keep sitting there talking about, the money in the roster. I don't want to hear it. That's where we're at in college football. I don't want to hear they bought their roster. It's what everybody's doing now. Kudos to them for getting the transfers that they have, for developing the great athletes that they get to come to that school that don't transfer in. They were the best team. They were the best team in the country, and they played that way.
I also want to dispel that notion that Ohio State is just some group of transfer mercenaries too, because I think, Dad, in this day and age, we see the dollar amounts. It's just a proxy for what we've always seen here. Ohio State, before you could pay players, signed this 2021 recruiting class that became the bedrock of this championship team as the number 2 recruiting class in the sport. And you look up and down this group. Now, it's interesting to look back. This group also included Quinn Ewers, who was the quarterback at Texas they faced. But JT Tuiamola, Jack Sawyer, Donovan Jackson, Emeka Egbuka, Trevion Henderson, Tyleik Williams, Denzel Burke, all parts of this class that overall, Dad, when you look at this Ohio State team, started 19 players who signed with the school out of high school that combined for 520 starts and stuck around. You had a bunch of those guys that had draft grades last year that probably would have been draft picks that decided to come back, and the money does make that a more compelling decision, there's no doubt, but the guys still had the choice to make, and this is still, Dad, again, the same way Ohio State's been recruiting all along, so the money didn't change it just codified it for us in a different way than before, and those guys deserve credit. In a day and age, and we talked about this with the money, can get some guys to stick around. You had a class of guys that all together came back and chose Ohio State, and if the money's a part of that decision, decision. Right. Good for them. They still did it. And that was still the core of this team, was guys that they signed, and guys like Sawyer, the hero from the last round against Texas, who is a Buckeye through and through. The story about him committing while his dad was asleep during a nap after a visit to Ohio State. That's the kind of stuff that I think and I hope won't be lost in the headlines around new age college football. Is this is an Ohio State team that they brought in and developed through and through that ultimately got to lift this trophy.
Yeah. And it was a game that I had talked about. Notre Dame had never had to pass themselves back into a game. I mean, Riley Leonard led in rushing with 17 carries. Love had 4. Price had 3. I mean, they only had 26 carries, and they were held to 53 yards. The OSU run defense was as dominant as advertised, without question. But Notre Dame had to throw, and they actually got back into the game, a 1 score away. If you told me before the game Notre Dame plays mostly man, which we can certainly talk about, play the most man of anybody in the country, and before that big play to Jeremiah Smith, if you told me that Jeremiah Smith would have 4 catches for 32 yards and a touchdown, I would have taken that as a Notre Dame fan, right? 8 yards a catch, and okay, he got a touchdown. You probably expect that. But then you throw in the 56-yarder, and he ends up with 5 catches for 88 yards. But he had 4 for 32 before that, and I would have taken that. Now, they had Ibuka, who had 6 catches for 64 yards. They only had 17 completions, but Will Howard carved up the Notre Dame back 7. He just did. As you mentioned, completing the first 13 in a row, going 17 of 21 overall. And then they rushed for over 200 yards. They were the dominant team. They deserved the win. Notre Dame, I give them credit, obviously, for making that comeback and making it a 1-score game. And there, again, we can talk about plays here and there, but Ohio State, give them their due. Give them their flowers. This looked ugly. We were very happy all watching the game after the first drive, and then we got very sad until the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter when we got happy again and made a bit of a run. So it made it an exciting game, end of the third quarter and all the fourth quarter. But the champions are Ohio State. They raised the trophy. They deserve to raise the trophy.
We said this after the Oregon game, where if Ohio State plays their best football, they're going to be an almost impossible team to beat in this tournament here. And while I was certainly drunk off belief coming off Notre Dame's run, and they deserved it, 13 straight wins and the job that Marcus Freeman and that group had done, that belief was earned. The wins against Georgia, the wins against Penn State in the tournament, all were indicators that, hey, maybe that big game stuff was behind us and not the way that we should view the lens of this game. But Ohio State went out there and executed at an incredibly high level. And now they get to lift the trophy. Ryan Day gets to lift the monkey off his back. I saw, thankfully, him and Will Howard survived a golf cart run in with the wall after the game and some tight turns around Mercedes-Benz Stadium, getting them out of there. We will hear from Ryan Day and Will Howard.
A bunch of guys who have just overcome some really tough situations. And there's a point where there's a lot of people that counted us out, and we just kept swinging and kept fighting. It's the reason why you get into coaching, is to see guys overcome things, learn life lessons, and then reach their dreams. This is what happened tonight.
We talked about that all week. Eliminate all the distractions. Don't listen to any of the outside noise. Just finish the job. And, when you get into big games like this, whoever is able to, have the poise and the noise and be able to, overcome adversity, because it wasn't always pretty today. It wasn't always perfect, and it's never going to be. But I think we, the team that we have and the leadership that we have with Coach Day, with just the resilience that this team has shown all year, it's just unbelievable.
Will Howard had poison the noise, no doubt. 17 of 21 for 231 and 2 touchdowns, 16 rushes for 57 yards, including some critical ones down the stretch as Ohio State notches their win in the national championship. GoJo and Golic here, Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield. And Dad, for Ryan Day there, I was amazed we didn't get the Lou Holtz call out. They showed him in the stadium at one point in one of the boxes watching in person what's become one of the funniest rivalries in sports. Current head coach and national champion against former head coach and octogenarian Lou Holtz in a war of words questioning Ohio State's toughness, where now Ryan Day and company get the last laugh here. So, and Dad, that was kind of emblematic. They resisted taking the bait at all, giving any sort of bulletin board material in the lead up the way that we had seen Kurt Cignetti at Indiana, James Franklin at Penn State. It was all business for Ryan Day company in here as they lifted this trophy.
Yeah, and listen, I don't think anybody can really question their toughness. You look at their season, they lost a 32-31 game to Oregon, which was playing as the best team in the country at that point. The inexplicable game is the Michigan game, right? I mean, that's an absolute head scratcher. Now, Michigan always has a tough defense, but the power and talent on offense for Ohio State, that was the real head scratcher, no doubt. And then they just bulldozed their way through the playoffs. So they get the last laugh. They get to raise the trophy, and we get to dig into the game and a game of some what ifs.
Yeah, and there were going to be a lot of those if you're a Notre Dame fan coming off this game who look at this season, Dan, and both teams. You mentioned Ohio State coming back from the depths after that Michigan loss that could have fractured that group and instead brought them closer together and is a huge part of now a great story that Ryan Day mentioned in the championship. And for Notre Dame on the other side, well published, the Northern Illinois loss that led to this bounce back and 13 straight wins to end their season and can still be the basis of a lot going forward. There were a lot of strides made by a really young football team in Notre Dame that's going to bring back a ton of talent, especially on the offensive line and defense coming into next season, and has a lot to look forward to. But Dad first has to figure out what went wrong in this game. And I think there were probably, I'd say, 4 key moments in this game that most people are going to think of. I think 3 are pretty obvious, right? You got the fake punt by Notre Dame with 11:18 left in the third quarter at their own 33. They go and put backup quarterback Steve Angeli in at the Shield. They have him throw a pass to Notre Dame's stud wide receiver Jordan Faison. And Dad, listen, some people might question the decision. That one, I had a bad reaction to at the time, but the further we get from it, the element of surprise, Notre Dame's had special teams exotics built in all year, and this is a little bit of resulting, but Angeli put the pass on the button for Jordan Faison and unfortunately just couldn't make the play there. And so that's one where, hey, Notre Dame's defense then responds and holds Ohio State to only a field goal. But I think the first critical decision that a lot of people might look at and raise an eyebrow, that in hindsight, I actually have much less of a problem with.
Oh, I mean, results matter, right? It didn't work, so you sit there and say why. And they did have the surprise for a bit, but Ohio State then recognized it. You had guys pointing to Angeli saying the quarterback's in, and Faison was actually covered pretty well by the Ohio State defender. But Angeli, man, just like when he came in before the half of the Penn State game and led Notre Dame down to a field goal at the end of the second quarter, he threw a great pass to a pretty covered Jordan Faison that hit Faison in the hands. And that's one I'm sure Jordan would love to have back. You know, it's a shame. Hit him in the hands. It's just, I called the game Sunday night, hit Mark Andrews in the hands on a 2-point conversion for Baltimore, you know, and you drop it. But the pass was there. So, I mean, that play should have worked. It didn't, and it goes down as an incompletion, but the execution was there from the pass and the play.
Yeah, so that's certainly one of the plays that tells the tale of the night. You go all the way to the last play, Dad, 3rd and 11. We already mentioned Christian Gray, who unfortunately we know had the rough outing against USC at the last game of the regular season that a lot of people pointed to. Made big plays for Notre Dame in that game, in the Penn State game with the interception that gives them a chance to win, but unfortunately had a rough outing on most of last night. And then overall, Dad, that decision, where you at on the idea of the all-out blitz on 3rd and 11 with the season on the line that leads to that one-on-one isolation for the pass?
Well, I mean, the all-out blitz, what you're trying to do is get the ball out of the quarterback's hand, and you did. You got the ball out of the quarterback's hand. Unfortunately, you have one of the best receivers, certainly the best young receiver in the game in Jeremiah Smith, getting a couple of steps on Christian Gray, and you saw that ball in the air. I mean, that ball just hung in the air because he had to get rid of it because of the blitz. It was almost like a punt, but he had enough distance between himself and Christian Gray where he could wait for it to fall in his lap. Listen, we had talked about man coverage all leading up to this game. How much man would Notre Dame run? They run the most man. And it not only cost him in coverage, as again, Will Howard was 17 of 21, but it also cost them in Will Howard runs. You look at Will Howard's runs, he's 16 runs for 57 yards, average 3.6 yards a carry. You look at that stat line, you're like, okay, what's so great about that? But he picked up big first downs. And that was normally in man coverage. And the thing about man coverage, when a quarterback is going to run and he gets past the line of scrimmage, everybody's in man coverage. They're looking at their receiver. The quarterback has room. And Will Howard he converted a couple of big third down plays with his legs. Again, the numbers won't show a great average, but he converted. A lot of that was Notre Dame was in man. And listen, Notre Dame was going to play with what got him there. They were going to play man. They mixed it up some, but they were going to play man. And Ohio State, they said, okay, you're going to play man. We're going to carve you up. And they did.
Yeah, no, they won that matchup decidedly, especially in the first half when things were really in balance there. And I'm with you. That was kind of one of those things where you went with the one that got you there, and that had been the formula for Al Golden and this Notre Dame defense all year long was be aggressive. Credit to the Ohio State offensive line that had been restructured because of injury a lot of this year. They also, by and large, held up really well against a lot of those all-out pressure looks. There was a lot of pre-snap shifts, including on that final play, a lot of stuff designed to try and get them to jump, to get them to flinch, and they didn't budge on that one. So, again, that's another one. Really not a huge problem with the call. I don't love it, but that's been your identity all year long. And in the biggest moment of the game, going to that one is, again, it's a bad result, but the process is kind of what got you here. Dad, I think the sneaky biggest one, before we get to the actual biggest decision of the game, though, the 3rd and 5 fumble with 5 minutes left in the first half by Notre Dame. They bring tight end Mitchell Evans in jet motion. Riley Leonard calls for the snap. It hits Evans, and Notre Dame's able to fall on the football, but miss an opportunity there with 5 minutes left, Dad, where maybe they convert on that 3rd down and all of a sudden extend a drive, and Ohio State doesn't have time to go down and score their 3rd straight touchdown of the first half and swing the middle 8 of this game. The place that Notre Dame had dominated statistically for so much of the season and run, Dad, was the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half, able to swing the outcome of games. And instead, this time around, it was Ohio State that was able to parlay that touchdown there into momentum, then coming out of the halftime locker room where they got the ball first after deferring the opening coin toss and went down and promptly scored on that play as well. So ultimately shut the door. Then Notre Dame was able to mount a furious comeback. But that's one, Dad, where that's not a strategy. That's not a thought process. That's just an execution error in a critical spot on 3rd down, where going into this game, Notre Dame had been converting on 50% on 3rd downs on offense, and on defense holding other opposing teams to under 30% in every game so far through the tournament. In this game, Ohio State 9 of 11 on 3rd down, Notre Dame 5 of 12. Now, they were 3 for 4 on 4th down, so actually still converted at a pretty good clip, but you miss out on one of those critical ones in that spot and really have an issue, which, Dad, then leads us to the real big decision in all this that I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are going to have a tough time grappling with today. That was the decision to kick a field goal at 4th and goal from the 9, down 16 points with 9:27 left in the game here. Marcus Freeman and company coming off the first and only turnover forced by their defense, a fumble recovery on the opposing end that Notre Dame had drove down, looked like they were going to convert points out of here, and had been all gas, no breaks at that point. Down 2 scores that late in the game. Notre Dame was in 4-down territory the entire drive until that moment where all season long it had been well publicized. Marcus had more 4th down attempts than his first 2 years as head coach combined. Now opts for a field goal that Mitch Jeter ultimately misses. And Dad, the thought process here from Marcus Freeman was the explanation we got after the game on why he chose to go for the field goal there instead of going for the touchdown. Here was Coach Freeman after the game.
Yeah, I think it was 4th and 9 or 10, and I just thought, instead of being down 16, let's try to go down 13. And I know it's still a 2-score game, but you have a better probability of getting 14 points than you do 16 points. And so if it was a shorter fourth and goal situation, I probably would have gone for it, but I just felt 4th and 9 was not a great chance for us to make that. And, I decided to kick it, and we didn't make it. There's not many words to say when everybody's hurting. I'm just proud of them. I'm proud of what they've done. I'm proud of who they are, the way they represent themselves, and it's just an honor to be on this journey with them. I mean, there's going to be a lot of guys, seniors, that this was their final game with Notre Dame football, but they've left this place a better place.
And Marcus took accountability for the loss overall. Dad said it's on him to try and figure out why this happened and make it better going forward. But what was your initial reaction to that decision to kick the field goal, and has it changed at all with the benefit of a night's sleep?
I was completely against the decision in real time. Hearing the explanation I'm still against it. I still think they should have gone for it, but I can understand a little more the thought process. The missed field goal was with 9:27 left, so there was time. And Notre Dame had gotten a couple of stops, the defense. But overall, I still think they should have gone for it. They've been aggressive all year. They got the ball back and scored a touchdown and a 2-point. They made 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. Now, again, everybody's going to go, oh, wow, if they'd have gone for it, made it, they'd have got the ball back, scored again, it would have been a tie game. I mean, it's tough to do that in your mind, right? You just have to kind of go with the decision at the time. It was long. It was 4th and 9. Thought Notre Dame was in a good position. That was a long drive. That was a 12-play, 70-yard drive. And they were in good position at 1st and goal, and then in bad position at 4th and 9, 4th and goal at the 9. So it was kind of a far throw. It kind of limits your plays, and especially if you're inside the 5-yard line, where you can have Riley Leonard actually run the ball, have a rollout, have him run or throw, or have different options. 4th and 9, you really don't. So no. I understood it a little more, but I still feel they should have gone for it.
Yeah, I still disagree with it even now. And it was surprising given how aggressive Marcus has been all year long that at that moment they decided to go away from that. Because I get the math on it, but unfortunately, your defense stopping Ohio State's offense consistently enough to give you the amount of possessions that would have needed with under 10 minutes left in that game was the thing that I really worried about there. And the way you'd been executing on that drive. Again, this is a game where Notre Dame's defensive identity had been cracked in the first half. Couldn't stop the opposing offense. Notre Dame's rushing attack thwarted for most of the entirety of this game after the first drive. Jeremiah Love and company rendered pretty inept on the sideline. It was Jaden Greathouse in the Notre Dame passing attack. 128 yards for him is back-to-back. His 2 best games of the season come in their 2 biggest games of the season. And so trying to ride a wave where you're already so far from your identity, I was a little stunned they didn't go for it there and try and make that happen. But again, those are a handful of the plays that swing the balance of a game. And Marcus Freeman and this Notre Dame team had made more of those plays than not for the majority of this season here. Still really proud of this group, proud of what they've done, the growth from Marcus Freeman, the way that this team responded to adversity, and what they've got back as an opportunity next year. At some point with Jason Fitz in the next hour, maybe we can look ahead at what the odds are for already next season.
And the Bears are finalizing a deal to hire Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson as their new head coach. Guys, I saw a friend of the program, Diana Rossini, tweet that while this job made sense for Johnson, GoJo, we know you know this, a lot of people around the league were surprised that he took the job. So were you surprised, GoJo? We know you weren't. And why do we think he took the job? Is it just because he took it because of the quarterback? What do we think?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it here. And we had talked about it in the lead up to this hiring cycle. Hey, you only get so many opportunities to leave everyone at the altar if you're Ben Johnson, going back to the nest in Detroit, going back to the opportunity he thought he had there. I think everyone understood this is probably going to be the end of this current iteration of the Lions roster, with Aaron Glenn likely going to be next up as he's interviewing with the Jets today for their head coaching vacancy. And so I just thought of the jobs left on the board, Dad. You're in a division that you've got a young quarterback in Caleb Williams that does have a host of weapons. You've got a clear directive. Go out and find offensive line talent in front of him, because there's a lot of other stuff there that you would assume to go along with the play calling duties we expect Ben Johnson to man there, that he'd be able to go and start to rebuild the psyche of a young quarterback that at times looked beaten down and exasperated last year. And so, again, for Chicago, we knew, Dad, their charge was going to be find someone to best maximize Caleb Williams. And of the names on the board, I don't think you were going to do better than what you got with Ben Johnson.
So of the teams left and who has a quarterback, obviously Dallas has a quarterback, Jacksonville has a quarterback, but Chicago has a young quarterback, someone that you can continue to build around. And quite honestly, Ben Johnson got to see him up close and personal. In the 2 games Chicago had against Detroit, Caleb Williams threw for 681 yards, 5 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Say what you want about Caleb. He did not turn the ball over a lot this year. And that's a big feather in his cap. For all the sacks that he took, you can blame the line, but you got to blame him as well. The inconsistencies that he had. Ben Johnson sees a guy to build around. And he'll look to bring in Dennis Allen, the former New Orleans coach, as a D coordinator. Darren Rizzi, who was the interim coach for the Saints. Ben Johnson's going to look to bring him into Chicago as the special team coach. He's going to have to, he'll obviously hire an offensive coordinator, but Ben Johnson's going to be the one calling the plays. Make no mistake about it. He will be running the offensive show. This was considered one of the top jobs out there. Now, there were kind of reports and rumors. Did he want Ryan Poles? Did he want a GM that he knew, that he had a working relationship with? Possibly. Well, Ryan Poles is the GM, so he's going to have to get a working relationship with Ryan Poles. But this was kind of the matchup everybody thought was going to happen.
And it's the matchup of play caller and quarterback. But, Dad, as with a lot of these guys, and with Ben Johnson in particular, I think because of his interesting road here where he was very picky about the job that he was ultimately going to take, knowing that going back a couple of years, he was a guy that was going to be often courted in this area, making that jump from being just a great X's and O's coordinator who's no doubt still going to call great plays, but having to go now and manage the rest of the organization, where he's coming from a spot where he had Dan Campbell for that, where Dan Campbell has clearly displayed an aptitude for leadership that is uncommon amongst his peers in the NFL. And so now leaving the nest without him, what's that going to look like? Is he going to have things that he's learned from him to fall back on? Is he going to have those things that are going to help him here? Because Ben Johnson, personality-wise, and the way that he addresses things, Dad, is just not a guy that we know all that well at this point.
No, it's exactly. Listen, we go through this every year. I went through it for a couple of decades at ESPN when there was a new hiring cycle, and you would get coordinators, hot coordinators being first-time head coaches, and we would do a show like, hey, grade them. I'm like, how the hell can you grade them? You have no idea what they're going to do when all of a sudden they go from the coordinator chair to the head coaching chair, when every organizational question is going to be asked to them now. They don't just get to run the offense or run the defense. They're running the whole show. We have no idea how he's going to do. You could sit there and say, just like when you draft a quarterback from college, you think you know what he can do, but you're drafting on potential of what they can do. That's what you're doing. You're saying Ben Johnson's the hot coordinator, led a top scoring and top yardage offense in Detroit, going to be great as a head coach. We have no idea, have no clue. We think he will, but you're right. We have no idea what's going to happen.
But we do know that what has already happened is the Bears organization did not set him or Caleb Williams up for success in the way they organized this. Matt Eberflus being retained this last season only to fire him a year into Caleb Williams' tenure in Chicago sets him up for failure the same way they set up Justin Fields for failure in terms of his development as a young quarterback in this league. We see all the time how difficult that is, Dad. And I think what this process has unearthed for a lot of people is the Chicago Bears do not have their stuff together nearly as much as people will give them credit for, being one of the prestige organizations in the NFL, being one of the traditional organizations in the NFL. They're a group that has struggled to have their house in order. And so Ben Johnson is not walking into a perfect situation management-wise by any means.
No, not at all. And again, it's all around your rookie play caller who is now going to be on his third person calling plays for him, right? And going into just his second year. His third, understand that, his third person calling plays. Now, he will have the entire offseason to get the Ben Johnson system under wraps. And, you hope the player puts in the time. No, I'm sure you expect, the expectation is Caleb Williams will, and just dive into the playbook and dive into the relationship because that's the most important one, because quarterback's the most important position. So that relationship quarterback has with play caller is one of the most important ones in all of sports.
I also learned something today looking at our topic bar here on GoJo and Golic that a group of bears is called a sleuth, which I was unaware of. And I looked up and confirmed a group of 3 or more bears can be called a sleuth. And so he joined the sleuth after going, by the way, and being pranked that Ben Johnson was going to be his head coach. Remember, Caleb Williams got that call from someone who had hacked his number and tried to say that they were Ben Johnson getting ready to be his coach. So now they get to come have that all come full circle. Dad, the interesting thing I'll be curious to ask our buddy Jason Fitz about as this relates now. So the Bears and Patriots jobs are filled. Vegas, the Jets, New Orleans, Dallas, and Jacksonville all still open. The reports that we had seen that, Tom Brady's influence in the Raiders hiring cycle this year And the idea that Ben Johnson was a realistic candidate for the Las Vegas Raiders never made sense to me, because we talked about the appeal of the Bears job being pretty simple. There was nothing in my mind short of Tom Brady saying he'd be your friend and you'd get to hang out with the GOAT and maybe then, have some fun in Vegas. Going out there in a situation that feels somewhat listless right now with the construction of the roster, the quarterback situation, and the opportunity to change that this offseason just made no sense in my mind of going over there and trying to cobble together something in a situation that is so far from being competitive. And so that never made sense to me, and I'll be curious what Jason's read of that was, because, Dad, I'm sure for you, too, that never felt like a true option.
No, listen, all due respect to the GOAT Tom Brady, I don't think Tom Brady's talking anybody into, unless it's somebody who doesn't have other choices. Then you don't really have to talk them into, because let's be honest, Las Vegas is a horrible situation, especially for a coach that is being sought after by a number of teams. Why would you choose Vegas? I certainly wouldn't choose it because Tom Brady is a part owner and called me and is urging me to. That's such a minor part of the whole equation of management structure, cap structure, roster construction, of which they and the Jets are in a horrible spot. In New Orleans, you have Derek Carr. Now, Derek Carr said he's not going to take a pay cut, so you may not have Derek Carr. Like I said, Dallas and Jacksonville, you have a quarterback. But Vegas and the Jets, just the way their organization has been run, I mean, coaches with choices are not going to these places. I don't care who you have calling on their behalf or trying to talk them into. They're not going to get them. And Ben Johnson, I don't believe, was ever a realistic option for the Raiders.
Yeah, obviously I was tongue-in-cheek in referencing Tom Brady's role in this being something that would actually sway anyone and not just be a part of the process here. But it does underscore that now what we have left by and large are flawed jobs. That's what happens when you fire a head coach. Usually there are things wrong there, but obviously varying degrees of that. We talked about some of the ineptitude organization-wise for the Chicago Bears, but Jesse, when we think of organizational ineptitude, we usually think of the Jets, Jets, and they've got a big day right now in Florham Park on hand for them.
Yeah, so the other coordinator from Detroit, Aaron Glenn, getting a lot of interest. We're having Ian Rappaport reporting that Glenn's going to get a second interview with the Jets, with the goal from the team being not to let him leave without a deal. So what do you guys think? It would be just like the Jets to be like, we've locked you inside the building and you cannot leave until you sign this deal.
Rex Ryan somewhere losing his mind right now, telling anyone in the room that will listen to him that he should be the head coach of the New York Jets. Now, Diana Rossini, our friend over at The Athletic, senior NFL insider for them, said he's set to visit their team. They're hoping they can make it happen. But she said, keep an eye on New Orleans, who also have interest in Glenn. A lot of moving pieces right now. The Saints, who are meeting with Giants OC Mike Kafka today, and have Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver on the schedule tomorrow, who, Dad, I won't be surprised when Anthony Weaver, if Aaron Glenn is the defensive coach du jour, maybe outside of Mike Vrabel, who obviously has that moniker too, although was a head coach for a number of years in Tennessee already. If Aaron Glenn is the belle of the ball of defensive coordinators this year, I won't be stunned if Anthony Weaver is not far behind him, given the job that he did in Miami this year. But, Deb, what do you think about Aaron Glenn and the potential there for the Jets? He seems to be a guy that made a lot out of a little once the injury bug really hit hard in Detroit this year.
Yeah, listen, he was in 94. He was a first rounder. He was a 12th pick overall for the Jets. Spent the first 7 years of his career with the Jets. I don't know if that matters to him. That was a while ago. I would say that would be lower on the list as opposed to listening to what management has to say in the interview with New Orleans and the interview with the Jets, the structure of management, the current structure of the roster, the players that you have. The Jets, I think the Jets are the only team that interviewed more players than the Bears did, and the Bears ended up getting the guys they got in Ben Johnson. So if you have a choice, I'd be leery of the Jets and the Raiders, just like I said. If you have a choice, and we'll see. Aaron Glenn again is going to interview, it looks like, for New Orleans. We don't know if he'll be offered the job there. And listen, the Jets, if they target Aaron Glenn and say, this is the guy we want, then you do not let him leave. You don't let him get on the private plane and head to the next interview. You money whip him, or you do what you have to do to keep him there, if that in fact is the guy you want of the hundreds that you interviewed. And I could see it. Rex Ryan's not getting the job. I mean, as much as he wants it, he's not going to get the job. It's probably going to go to a young first-time head coach like Aaron Glenn. But Aaron Glenn has a choice, and it's just what he perceives as the better opportunity.
Yeah, Aaron Glenn is a guy that, Dad, from what we have seen publicly there, and I saw he did a great interview with Ryan Clark and this was over at the Pivot a while back, and talked about what he wants to be as far as his relationship with players, how, he would have players over to his house to watch tape in a way that most guys would point out as atypical, wanted to have that connection with him too. We have gotten more of a peek under the hood with him, and he does seem to ooze a lot of those leadership traits that you would desire in a head coach, not just a coordinator who also was able to go out there and execute at a high level, having to rework personnel after that Aiden Hutchinson injury in week 7.
Now, to finish up with maybe a bit of bad news, Lou Anarumo, who was fired by the Cincinnati Bengals as the D coordinator, looks like he's going to be hired by the Colts. And the number one target as defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals is Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden. And Al Golden is just listen, they gave up a lot of yards to Ohio State. Again, kudos to Ohio State. Congrats to them for doing what they did. But make no mistake, Al Golden's a fantastic defensive coach, and he really, really between what him and Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator for Notre Dame, they did masterful jobs. So Al Golden is getting his due, and it looks like he is the top candidate to be the DC for the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's what happens when you have success on a team. Your coaches get poached, and that may happen to Notre Dame.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about Marcus Freeman and the Chicago Bears in that run, but this is the one I was really afraid of because of the actual reality of the situation here with Al Golden. And I will resist the urge to do anything in assigning blame for last night on Al Golden and the interview process and the lead up here. He's done too good a job all along for me to ever assume anything there. But if it is the end for Al Golden in South Bend, how grateful are we, how lucky Bengals fans, if that's the next coordinator that they can call their own on the defensive side of the football. A masterful job all season long, and the Bengals would be lucky to have him. We'll head to hour number 2 here. Joe Thomas, Jason Fitz, and more joining us here.
Eats like a meal. So this week's award going to go to the Eagles offensive line. Okay, so while they did give up 7 sacks to the Rams, they also did allow Saquon Barkley to run for 205 yards and 2 scores in the snow. So fellas, I would say well-deserved.
I would say well-deserved indeed, Dad, and really a Lifetime Achievement Award for this season and the job Philadelphia has done all year long in a year where they were replacing Jason Kelce, not only as the center of an offensive line that had one of the most lethal plays in sports in the brotherly shove, the tush push, but also just a leader and a voice on that team, and what Cam Jurgens came in and immediately was able to do there. Jeff Stoutland, the job that he does coaching, Jordan Mailata, and his continued progression. I laughed my ass off, Dad. The first drive for the Eagles in this win over the Los Angeles Rams, they ran one of those bash plays where they exchange responsibility. They used the running back as the read player going east and west and actually blocked the play for Jalen Hurts at quarterback going north and south. And they pulled Jordan Mailata from the backside of the offensive line. And when he got so far out in front, he could realize, hey, I'm a little bit out of phase. He actually stopped, turned around, waited for Jalen Hurts to catch up, and then actually was able to get in front of a defender coming from the backside and allow Jalen to run for that first Eagles touchdown. So an incredibly smart group of dancing bears up front for this Eagles group that are incredibly deserving of this chunky award.
And Mailata's a monster and obviously very athletic as a former rugby player. I mean, it just and dancing bears is the perfect analogy. And it's amazing. They replaced an undersized center with another undersized center in Cam Jurgens, and he is immediately a Pro Bowler. So, I mean, Lane Johnson, you wonder how much longer he's going to last at the right tackle position, but the rest of that line should be fine. I mean, and of course, you mentioned with Stoutland, an excellent offensive line coach. And when you meet the guy, a true offensive line coach, there is no doubt about it.
There is no doubt about it, but the job he's done with Cam, how about Mekhi Becton coming over, the former first-round pick of the New York Jets, kicking into offensive guard for them. He threw one of the Rams linebackers out of the club so hard on one of the many great Saquon Barkley runs. It's been really impressive to see how he has grown alongside Lane Johnson and the rest of that group there. We're going to talk great offensive lineman here, great opportunity for us today to talk to an all-timer, a Hall of Famer, and a Browns legend, and Joe Thomas, kind enough to join us here now on GoJo and Golic. Joe, good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
No, we appreciate you joining us this morning, Joe. We were just talking about this Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, but one of a few great groups, them, the Bills, making this postseason run here. But let's start with that group in Philly. As you've watched through this postseason, what impressed you most about the way that they have reformatted this ground game around Saquon Barkley this season?
Well, I think the way that they creased the edges with those big offensive tackles, you guys were just talking about it. Lane Johnson, one of the great right tackles of all time. Jordan Mailata, one of the great steals of all time, coming over from New Zealand, former rugby player. I think that they just control the edges of the defense and allow Saquon Barkley to get the run started, right? Which is the most important thing when you're trying to run some of these outside zone types things. You need to get your running backs heels into the line of scrimmage. And then from that point, it's up to him, right? And then now he's able to use his natural athletic ability, his ability to make people miss, run people over. And I think really just having those tackles that can crease the edges of a defense have made all the difference in the world for the Eagles.
So you look at the four teams that are in the championship games. The Washington Commanders are the surprising team, no doubt about it, with Jaden Daniels doing what he's done. That O-line, kind of a group that was put together that has kind of overperformed what they thought they were going to do. But I want to talk big picture about the culture and how important that is. I mean, Dan Snyder out as owner, new ownership, new culture in Washington, and now Washington, the surprise team in the playoffs. How important do you think that culture shift was?
Well, I think it's really important because anytime you have a black cloud hanging over the organization for as long as Washington did, it's really difficult whenever you deal with adversity to be able to overcome it, right? Because players, they're humans, right? And so there's a human nature of like when you have that black cloud hanging over you, you're going to kind of make those little internal excuses of why you can't get something done when it gets hard and when it gets tough and when it gets dirty and nasty. Whereas when you get rid of that and all of a sudden you've got this coach and Dan Quinn who gives you a belief and a hope and really a right way through that adversity, all of a sudden there's a buy-in and there's a togetherness that you get from the team that you previously didn't have. And then all of a sudden you're able to go on this cool little run that they've made so far. And then of course, obviously Jaden Daniels, that helps too. Like when you got a quarterback who's just unflappable, it makes a huge difference. But I think all of those things together give you a belief that I think you really need to have when you are an underdog in the playoffs, because it's us versus the world. Nobody gives us a chance. And that's an easy rallying cry for those guys to get behind.
From a black cloud hanging over one franchise now lifted to maybe the rainbow that's been hanging over the Chiefs franchise ever since Patrick Mahomes lined up under center for them. Joe, they're back in a familiar position here. We know a lot of people had some gripes with how they got here, maybe some of the unnecessary roughness calls that continue to go their way. But from what you've seen of this team that is in dynasty mode right now, what is it going to take for someone to knock the Chiefs off at this stage of the game?
Well, I think you got to play mistake-free football, right? The Chiefs, even though maybe their offense hasn't produced at levels that we're used to seeing, they make you pay if you make any mistakes. And if it's a close game when the ball's in Patrick Mahomes' hand, everybody on that offense, everybody on that team is cool, calm, and collected because they know that they're going to get whatever they need, right? If they're down by 3 and Patrick's got the ball with a minute left and one timeout, they know they're exactly what they're going to be able to get. And there's a hope and a belief with those guys, just the same way as we talked with the Commanders, that Patrick Mahomes is going to make it happen as long as I'm in my spot doing my job. It gives you an ability to focus on your job when you have that great player at quarterback because you know the ball's going to go to where it's supposed to and somebody's going to get a chance. And as an offensive lineman, we always used to say, not me, not now, not ever, which means I don't want to be the reason we lose, right? And you know Patrick Mahomes is going to give you a chance, and you want to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed when the ball comes your way, when the moment is biggest, because Patrick Mahomes is going to be that dude that gets the ball where it needs to be.
And speaking of quarterbacks, a team not in it that many thought would maybe be able to knock off Kansas City is Baltimore. They lose to Buffalo. Buffalo goes on to play Kansas City. I think Lamar is going to win his 3rd MVP award. If so, he'll be the 6th player with at least 3 MVPs. All other 5 have won at least 1 Super Bowl or NFL championship. He has not. How fair or unfair is it to label the quarterback as the one not winning the big game in a situation like that?
I think it's fair to an extent because they're the ones that get the credit when you win, right? You win a championship. I mean, Tom Brady's won 7 Super Bowls. Yeah. Don't mind that the first few Super Bowls he won, he had this fantastic defense and an amazing run game. But really, we know that at some point in the playoffs in the Super Bowl, the ball is going to be in the quarterback's hands. And if he's able to make that magic, you win the game. We saw it right at the end. Lamar Jackson throwing to Mark Andrews has an opportunity to tie the game, take it in overtime. Throw is not just perfect. Obviously, Mark Andrews still drops the football. But if that throw is perfect, you would assume the ball gets caught and you go into overtime. And then you got a chance with some momentum to go win that game. So when the ball's in your hand and the game's on the line, which it usually is with one of those quarterbacks, you're going to get the lion's share of the credit or the lion's share of the blame.
And that is the way it goes, and it's what they sign up for, and certainly something Lamar Jackson can handle, given everything we've seen him already do for this organization. Joe, I want to go to the organization that you called home during your career in the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, at a bit of a crossroads right now, a disappointing season after more volatility at the quarterback position. As you look at this team going into 2025, Tommy Rees hired as the offensive coordinator after spending last year as the tight ends coach. But overall, what do you want to see from the Browns to try and improve and get them back to being competitive more consistently going forward?
Well, you got to figure out the quarterback position. Obviously, last season, Joe Flacco comes in, leads them to the playoffs, playing good football, proves that this is an offense that can score points. They can keep up with the other team's defense. We got one of the best defenses in the NFL with the reigning defensive player of the year and Myles Garrett, and an outstanding secondary. But when you can't figure out that quarterback position, it's like Dan Snyder over there with Washington. Like there's a black cloud over the organization and there's a belief that you can't do it. You can't win games when you don't have that quarterback position figured out. And it's going to be a tough year to figure that out, right? Not a lot of guys available in free agency. Maybe you can trade for a veteran guy that's kind of on the downslide. But thus far in the draft evaluation process, everybody's saying that the quarterbacks last year that won the first round are all better than the ones that are available this year. Obviously, it's still a little bit early, but for the Browns sitting at number 2, I think that is clearly the highest priority in the organization because they still have a team that's built to win now if they're able to figure out that quarterback spot.
What an undervalued position in the running back position. Did that change with what Saquon Barkley did going to another team? Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs. Do you think that improved the overall value of the running back position or just now same old, same old?
Well, I think it improved the value to fans, right? Because fans typically go too far in one direction or the other. And so even though I think that from a salary standpoint, running backs were properly valued within NFL organizations, I think fans just assumed like, oh, well, they're not getting paid like basically anybody else on the offense, so they have no value. But I think teams have always really realized that, hey, if you have a great offensive line, now you can get the running back into the line of scrimmage, and then now their ability and their willingness to make guys miss or run people over or make those big explosive plays are able to be shown. But unless you have that offensive line, it really doesn't matter who you have back there, with the caveat being Barry Sanders. If he's back there, it doesn't really matter who the offensive line is, but pretty much everybody before and since him, you've got to have a good offensive line that can get him to that first level of defenders to allow him to see whatever his ability is. And I think when you're a position that relies so heavily on not just one guy up front, but 5, sometimes 6, when you talk about a tight end or a fullback, like your value is just automatically going to be diminished because it's not like the quarterback position where the ball's in your hand and you can go make a play as long as you throw the ball to the right spot and somebody can make the play in the secondary. Like as a running back, yes, you can have a huge impact, but you got to have all those pieces around them.
Incredibly dependent position, to your point, unless you are Barry Sanders. And then in that case, you are higher than the plane of mere mortals in the rest of your position group here. Joe, we know you're joining us this morning on behalf of Colt Manufacturing Safety Impact Award Program, something you're very passionate about. What can you tell us about what they've got going on?
Yeah, Colts launched the Safety Impact Award to encourage safe and responsible firearm ownership. Myself, Clay Matthews, Adam Vinatieri, Fletcher Cox, we're all in this. We've all picked a nonprofit organization to represent. And if you go to safetyimpactaward.com, you can vote for the winning nonprofit. Mine is Ducks Unlimited, which if you like drinking clean water, if you like breathing clean air, you're going to want to vote for Ducks Unlimited because they're the leaders in wetland conservation throughout the country. And so for every $1 or every vote, Colt is going to donate $1 to that winning nonprofit. And then if you are a voter and there's a safety, which my wife, Annie, that's her favorite play in football. If there's a safety in the Super Bowl and you're one of the people that voted for the winner, you can win a portion of $100,000 compliments of Credova, which I think is a great deal for everybody, encouraging safe and responsible firearm ownership, protecting clean water, helping me out, getting my organization the win, and then an opportunity to win some money and a little fun prop bet that costs you nothing in the Super Bowl.
All right, there you go. Help out our friend and your friend, Joe Thomas. Head over to safetyimpactaward.com and wait around for the Super Bowl and see if one of our favorite plays and one of Joe's wife's favorite plays shows up there and gets everybody a nice payday here. The Hall of Famer, Joe Thomas, kind enough to give us some time this morning. Joe, always appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
Thanks, Joe.
Awesome stuff, as always, talking some beef with Joe Thomas. And Dad, it is going to be interesting. This is a postseason run. You mentioned the running back viability, and Joe rightly points out it's a position that requires a lot, and all the guys that we've seen make this jump have done so largely in organizations that had a healthy structure up front, and that includes the Buffalo Bills, who probably are going to start and get more of the deserved praise for the job they've done there and how they've allowed James Cook and the rest of that running back room to eat in the process.
Yeah, Buffalo Bills giving up the least amount of sacks this year. And you look at those two teams, Buffalo and Baltimore, again, a game I just called, they had 4, Buffalo had 4, and Baltimore had 5, only 4 and 5 offensive line combinations this year. That was some of the lowest in the league, to the point of yours and Joe's of continuity on that.
For more on what we just saw, though, from the championship event in college football and some of the NFL offseason openings, Jason Fitz, kind enough to join us from Yahoo Sports Inside Coverage, the College Football Power Hour, and more here. Fitzy, good morning, brother. How are you feeling today after watching my hopes and dreams get mashed into the turf last night?
Well, I mean, look, as much as I love to rib both of you guys, my heart was aching for you because I think, you know, the first drive gave me so much hope. Like when we watched Riley Leonard come out and just be superhuman for that first drive, and it just, I sat there and I expected, my prediction was an 11-point win for Ohio State. So I actually ended up right on this one. But after that first drive, I thought, you know what, they're the same, the Magic, of the Irish, something's going to go different. Then it didn't. So I felt for you guys, especially anytime you watch a team dominate on third down, particularly the way Ohio State did last night. I think that's the suffocating part of it. They were 9-12 in the game, but it didn't matter if it was third and short or third and long. They converted everything on third down, and that's heartbreaking for fans of the other team when you're sitting there saying, "Man, if we can't get them off the field, what do we do?" My heart broke for you.
Yeah, not getting them off the field was obviously huge, especially, again, that first drive. Understand, people, it was 18 plays, 75 yards, 9 minutes and 45 seconds. I mean, you want to talk about euphoria by Notre Dame fans, and the touchdown ended up down by our section, and we were just like going nuts, like, oh my God. And then the bottom fell out, and you credit to Ohio State without question. And I'm wondering, Jason, in the era of NIL and the transfer portal especially, do you think we'll see a team like Ohio State where so many players decided to come back to say, you know what, and maybe because of NIL, they came back and getting the money, where you're going to see a group collectively say, let's run this back because we think that we can win the title?
Yeah, I do. I think NIL is going to change a lot of this. I mean, look, I know that he's not staying, but Carson Beck going over to Miami, he's going to make more money in Miami this year than Brock Bowers is going to make for his entire first deal, right? So I think we just have to remember sometimes that this NIL money can be a huge difference in the way that this all plays forward. And guys, I think ultimately you're going to need some of this. Ohio State spent reportedly, $20 million? But now look at what they got out of it. They got a run where, yes, a year they lost to Michigan, but to win the national championship, they had to beat a Tennessee defense that was absolutely dominant. They then had to beat the number one team in the country in Oregon. Then they beat a Texas defense that was supposed to be one of the best in the country. Then they went out and they had their way with the Notre Dame defense that was one of the best in the country. And in the process, they get this legacy of a national championship that we've never seen before. Those 4 wins over 4 massive brands to get a national championship. There's such a tip of the cap to that. Yeah, I think you're going to see the teams that win more often than not because of the extension of the season, the playoffs, the way it plays out. Yeah, you're going to see the teams that are able to keep their guys, use their NIL money to keep their guys in-house. Those teams are going to do better.
Fitz, with that in mind, how much does this win change the perception of Ryan Day around the sport and around Columbus going forward?
Yeah, look, this has to quiet some of it, doesn't it? I mean, I got to give a lot of credit to Ryan Day. I got to give a lot of credit to Chip Kelly. The way that this offense has been run since the Michigan game is so different. And I know they've used what feels like a bajillion offensive line combos, had to use another one in this game, but just the way that they called the playoff games were so different than what we saw in that Michigan game. I think you have to tip your cap to both of the coaches. And Ryan Day, yeah, I've said it here. I'll say it again. I understand people say you just don't get it. No, I get it. I think it's stupid that Ohio State fans are still obsessed over Michigan, even after winning a national championship. I understand it. I think it's not the right logic. That being said, if you're looking around and saying, oh, pressure, 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 doesn't this feel a lot like Harbaugh? Where everybody was like, oh, Harbaugh's going to have to win it. Otherwise, Michigan's going to give up on him. And then all of a sudden Harbaugh wins it. And then Michigan fans are sitting there saying, well, why would he leave? Right? Like if you're an Ohio State fan, you're looking at it and saying, no, we got one of the best. Like it's going to be interesting to see if Ohio State fans, a large section of the fan base is now out here chirping about how great their program is and their coach is the same coach that they wanted to fire a month and a half ago. Modern college football at its finest.
As we had brought up on the show, Jason, if we're still in the 4-team playoff, Ohio State's not in the 4-team playoff, probably Notre Dame not either, and Ryan Day probably loses his job. I mean, inexplicably so, because you're bringing in a coach to beat Michigan. Again, I don't understand that when he had so many wins regardless of that. Okay, back to the game. Mike brought up 4 points. We always talk about a game, 4 or 5 plays that can turn it. Well, the big one was the 4th and goal at the 9 for Notre Dame with 4:40 left in the game, down 31-15, and they decided to kick the field goal instead of going for the touchdown. What was your thought of Marcus Freeman's decision there?
You guys know I'm the biggest nerd, which means I usually follow the analytics on everything, right? I'm usually the guy that's like, well, actually, guys, the numbers say, like, I'm usually that guy. I didn't have a problem with that call in the moment because what I kept thinking is you already had a touchdown and a 2-point conversion. Now you're going to tell me that you're going to get 2 more touchdowns and 2 more 2-point conversions. That feels like a heavy lift. And 4th and 9, when you're not particularly glowingly throwing the football throughout the course of the game, feels like a low probability play to me as well. I thought kicking the field goal, like the logic to me was now we at least don't have to get a bunch of 2-point conversions and we're still going to have to get stops, which by the way, they did. I mean, if they had made the field goal and the rest of the game was playing out the same way, Ohio State gets the ball back. What happened after the missed field goal? They were able to force the punt, right? They get the ball back. They score a touchdown. Now all of a sudden they don't need another touchdown and a 2-point conversion. I understand the numbers say don't do it, but man, I think the concept, if I went into yesterday morning and said, you know how you guys need to get back in this game? You're going to need 3 touchdowns and 3 2-point conversions all in the last quarter and a half of the football game. You would laugh at me and say we're screwed, right? So I felt like even though the numbers don't favor it, I had no problem with the call. And by the way, when you ask most important plays, there's one play in this game nobody's talking about that I think was key. First drive, Ohio State's first drive. They had 3rd and 4. And Will Howard had to run around, find somebody. He managed to get a completion on 3rd and 4. I didn't think it was going to happen. If Ohio State punts the ball back to Notre Dame after a 10-minute drive that just resulted, that defense was gassed. That to me was the most important play in the game because if Notre Dame scores and goes up 14-0, this is a much different game. They had to get that first down on the first drive. So that was another key play for me.
Yeah, I think you can throw that in there. We talked about the 3rd and 5 for Notre Dame where they snapped the football into a motioning tight end. Yeah. I think you could throw R.J. Obens roughing the passer on a 2nd and long play that would have had Ohio State way backed up there and probably a chance to get the ball back later in that game that extended a drive. So there are going to be little moments all over the screen. It's why when one guy gets bummed after a game, you never dogpile, because there are so many moments that go into losing a game like this where you felt like you had a chance at the end. Zoom back out here, big picture, Fitz. First year of the college football expanded playoff here. I've seen mixed reviews. I've seen some people complaining that this champion will be so different from what we've had in years past, that the opportunity presented here doesn't do. I think it was Chip Patterson over at the Cover 3 pod said, this format will not do the best job of crowning a champion overall in college football, just for crowning the best team in the tournament at the end of the season. What say you about the way that this impacted how the sport finds a champion overall?
Greatest playoff we've ever seen in college football, greatest championship run we've ever seen in college football. And look, I mean, in almost every sport, do we really care if it's the best team that wins? No, we care about the dramatic playoff bracket. I mean, the NHL is famous for, if you get a hot goalie of the lowest seed, can turn around and win a Stanley Cup. And that's what we love about that sport. March Madness is March Madness for a reason. Hell, most of America was rooting for the Giants to dethrone an undefeated Patriots team, right? Like, we don't want the best team in the entire season. Like, if it was just really crowned the best champion for the entirety of the regular season, then fine. Like, why are we watching the playoffs in the NFL? Just give it to the Chiefs. They had the best record. So I think it was an incredible season. I think this is the beginning of a very special era in college football that the sport's going to be better for it. The only thing I don't love is that the championship game came on January 20th. I think they've got to look at the calendar and figure out how to not be stuck on the same weekend as, you know, huge NFL football. You'll never win in there. Plus, I think putting it on MLK Day and the inauguration was stupid by the sport. More eyes should have been on the game last night. But the actual champion itself, I think, is the best run we've ever seen. And the best run is the beginning of what we're about to see continually for college football. I love it.
Yeah, I think your point stands about, hey, there are some tweaks around the schedule of the sport and the portal and all these different things that you can make to probably improve it at this point. But in terms of picking a champion, I thought it was interesting protest by Chip, just because, yes, the history of the sport was littered with, for years, hey, you would have teams play, you would have the AP vote at the end of the year based on who they thought was the champion, and we'd go with that. People were claiming them. You had the BCS era, then you had the early college football playoff for the last decade with 4 teams. And I do feel like, well, if we're talking about, again, to your point, an exciting postseason format to me is different than crowning the best champion. But I think you can accomplish both here. And quite honestly, I think the 12 team is as necessary now as it's ever been. I still don't love the fact that we added a bunch of body games onto the bodies of these young people without their say-so in the process. But Dad, in terms of picking a champion, we are in a sport right now that, especially in the name, image, and likeness portal era, in the era of these bloated super conferences here, the scheduling disparity is as wide as it's ever been, but that's always been a difficult thing to wrap its head around. We've always been grasping at straws, trying to use early out of conference matchups as a means to guess it and cross-pollinate it. So when it comes to the end of the year, we can rank these teams. We were basically spending years crowning these teams by the applausometer early on. And now we've gotten to a point where you can give a margin for error for teams in a time where it's more necessary than ever for all the reasons we mentioned roster structure wise. Give them a margin for error to get to the dance, and then we can actually have these teams from all these disparate conferences play and do it out on the field. Yes, it's a single elimination postseason, so you open yourself up to some stuff, but that was more seeding issues this year, having the teams that got eyes lose, having all the conference champions lose, than I think it was actually an ineptitude or a flaw in the system overall. And so I actually think in college football in particular, Dad, this feels necessary given how fast and how unwieldy the sport tends to be.
Yeah, I mean, listen, overall, you're never going to get the equal of schedule strength, right? That's why they have a schedule strength list every year. The SEC and or the Big Ten are going to have the toughest games. The SEC, hasn't gone to 9 conference games, and the Big Ten has, and the Big Ten wanted the SEC to go to 9 games, and the SEC is not. So you're always going to have a disparity in schedules. Notre Dame's going to always come up because they're not in a conference. Jason, how do you think this thing goes when it goes to 14 games like they're talking about in 26?
Yeah, the hard part is, I think you're right. You keep adding games to bodies, and it gets really difficult. One thing makes it easier for the NFL. I mean, the more we get, the more proof of tape we get for all these guys in the way they play, the easier it is to evaluate who they're going to be in the NFL. We have to understand that expansion is not going to go anywhere because this thing's making money, right? College football makes so much money through the process. You said something there, Senior, real quick, that I want to drill down on it. Not just because I'm with 2 Notre Dame guys. I keep hearing Notre Dame has to join a conference. Notre Dame has to join a conference over and over and over again. Did we not see through this process the run? The fact is, Notre Dame right now, they will never get an automatic bid. They will never get the chance for an automatic bye. So they're always going to have to play an extra game, and they're never going to be able to backdoor their way into this thing. They're never going to be SMU that just suddenly won their conference and they are in this thing, whether you think they belong or not. They will never get those advantages. So for everyone that says they have to join a conference, I would remind you, Notre Dame is actually choosing a tougher path to a national championship every single year. If they choose the tougher path, we shouldn't be penalizing that. We should be turning around saying, all right, look, like it doesn't, to me, I just think this whole thing is a little bit jaded.
People don't like different. Notre Dame in a lot of ways represents different in a way that makes folks uncomfortable. What I will say is I will put an asterisk next to one never that you mentioned there, that Notre Dame will never have the automatic bye, because based on what we saw from this year, one of the chief complaints was about seeding and how we need to go to natural seeding over giving the conference champions, the 4 highest ranked, those automatic buys through the first round. And while that would need unanimous consent to change next year, which I don't believe it will, I struggle to see a world in 2026, Jason, where that doesn't happen. I think the SEC and the Big Ten are going to drive that bus because their teams are more likely to be up there. But Notre Dame would be the beneficiary of that if all of a sudden it's, hey, we're just going to rank the best teams and then the top 4 are going to get a bye, because Notre Dame could absolutely pull that off.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then God, that's even more like why join a conference? If you're Notre Dame, you get to keep the money every single round. You don't have to split it. For anyone that doesn't know, every round, every time somebody made it to the next round, the money gets split for the conference. Notre Dame takes all that home. And frankly, again, in my mind, like there's no incentive. If Notre Dame has a shot at a bye, particularly enough, if I'm Notre Dame, saying screw you to the
Junior, Mike Golic Sr. and Jason Fitz here with you. And over on DraftKings, guys, Tums has a food popularity pool going. And over this past weekend for the divisional games, the people decided on the most popular spicy foods. And after eating spicy foods, Tums wants to remind you that whenever heartburn strikes, get fast relief with Tums. It's time to love food back again. So guys, did the people get the spicy food situation right here? So for spicy sauce, the winner is buffalo. For spicy snack, chips and hot salsa. Spicy appetizer, buffalo chicken dip. Spicy wings, buffalo wings. Main dish, spicy fried chicken. So clearly buffalo rules the day here. It's all about buffalo. What do you guys think? Did the people nail this, or did we miss something here?
Can I just say, the main dish category, I love Tums. I just got back from New Orleans. We have some very fun stuff that you're going to see during Super Bowl week here. Do we just put spicy in front of a bunch of main dishes and call it a day on this? Like spicy fried chicken, spicy barbecue, spicy sausage pasta, spicy tuna roll. Like, yes, I get these things all exist here, but it feels like that we have really shoehorned that one into the process. In a way, they all sound delicious. They all sound great. And for my money, Dad, buffalo, one of my favorite flavor varietals overall, so I'm not mad at any of this. It just stuck out as very funny to me to just see spicy. It's like when a rapper goes through a song and we'll just put the same word at the end of like 8 different lines and tie it all together.
Yeah, I would. I would go with a spicy hot Italian sausage and peppers. Now, again, you're going to need Tums after that, no doubt about it. But I would take that over the spicy chicken. I think the best thing on this list is the spicy appetizer. Buffalo chicken dip is one of the greatest dips of all time that I will normally. And when it's an appetizer, I'm screwed because I fill up on that so much that I don't have enough left in me for the main course. Also, the spicy snack, I would do chips and I would put the hot salsa in queso dip, Jason. So I would mix the hot salsa in a queso dip for the chips and then eat that with the buffalo chicken dip and call it a day.
To no one's surprise, I like to compartmentalize my food like a child. So I can't really I love chips and salsa, but I also have to have the salsa has to be in a bowl on the side, and then sour cream has to be next to the salsa in a separate bowl because I like the hot, but I also like the cool all at once. So the thought of putting the salsa into the cheese, I don't know, man. I feel like I'm the guy that takes my chip. When I take a chip out, I break it in half first thing because I don't want to double dip. I want to be proper here. I put one half of it into the salsa, one half of it into the sour cream, stack them like a little mini sandwich at that point, and eat them. So I get both things going at once. That's the way I do it.
Jason, honestly, I'm not mad at you on that one. I also kind of recoiled when Dad talked about missing the salsa and the queso. Now, you can get a spicy queso that's got a little bang to it. To me, the textures are just too off, so I like to keep them separate as well. I'm a little more Fitzy in that. Can I say this, though? I was interested in this. The drink paired with spicy food, to me, is the most interesting category here. How you go about neutralizing all that heat. Cola won on this, followed by sweet tea, lemonade, water. I'm surprised milk was as far down the list as it is because it's the one that actually does the best job. We all did the one chip challenge back when we were at ESPN. And while I was going nuclear and cursing on air a bunch of times, I was trying to drown the chip in milk. And it was the only thing that gave me a fighting chance. So I think that one, Dad, criminally underseeded in this.
I agree. I think milk should be up there a little bit. And Jason, I want to go back to you break the chip in half because you don't double dip. That's the most overrated thing. Who cares if you double dip? We had a bunch of Mike and Jake's friends watching the game, 20-some people with food last night. And we treated the main dishes and everything like finger food. Everybody was just reaching in and grabbing with their fingers, double dipping with the chips and dip. I mean, come on. I mean, let's get past the no double dipping or no finger food type things. Let's get over that. Let's be adults here.
I guess it depends on who you're with, you know? Like, are the people gross?
You gotta,
right? You know? You just gotta.
I've also watched
a bunch of randos
like,
versus people that you know.
Yeah, or people you know who are gross. Like, you just have to make a decision.
I could have been in a setting where I didn't know the people and I'm double dipping. I don't give a damn.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me, but I'm just saying I would probably have to make a judgment call on the type of individuals I was eating the food with.
Can I just
reminder, the Golic family eats so much. Like,
yeah.
You guys like one chip. You guys eat the whole chip. Like you guys eat 90% of the chip. Like I've sat with you guys. You're basically just shoveling, right? Like I'm a biter, like a little biter. So I might get a chip.
You're a biter. You're a biter.
You're a biter.
Okay.
We're still talking about the chips. What do we
enjoy that one, internet. We appreciate your continued efforts in bringing down Jason Fitz. I will say, thinking back on it now, one of the things I'm most disappointed about from last night's national championship loss was the fact that I was so stressed. And so I almost puked after the first touchdown drive because it became real that maybe for a while we had a possibility of winning. But after that, I was such a ball of nerves. I barely ate, and there was so much good food in there, and I feel like I just completely wasted the opportunity. So that was a bummer there. But either way, don't waste your opportunity. Head on over, vote in this pool here. Shout out to the Tums folks, one of my favorite products overall. Fun to be doing business with them because they have saved literally my life and my happiness on multiple occasions. Speaking of someone's life and happiness, Jason Fitz has tied his the way we've tied ours to Notre Dame to the Las Vegas Raiders, his beloved Las Vegas Raiders, who now swung and missed, unfortunately, in the Ben Johnson sweepstakes. He's hired as the head coach of the Chicago Bears. Fitz, did you think this was ever real? And where did the Vegas Raiders actually go from here in terms of a viable candidate?
Yeah, it was real enough. I mean, the people that, you know me, guys, like what I like to do is really talk to as many people that I think are plugged in as possible and try and get as much education as I can in the process. The people that were plugged in on this all across the league, even national people, all had a sense that Ben to the Raiders looked very real. A lot of surprise around the league that it didn't happen. I was surprised that it didn't happen. Where they go from here now, I mean, Pete Carroll has been long for the last week, has been the sort of plan B in the eyes of many for the Raiders. And I hear already Raiders fans are complaining, oh my God, he's so old. Well, he's only going to coach for 3 years. I will remind everybody that when they make their next hire, that will be their 15th head coach in the last 31 years. So if Pete Carroll only makes it 3 years, that's above the average for the Raiders. So I don't know what everybody's complaining about. I think Pete Carroll's a leader on this. But guys, sneakily, if I had a choice, one of the guys on their list that they intend to interview is Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator of the Chiefs. That would be my choice. Go out there and get somebody that's been a head coach before, which I think is important for changing the culture. Somebody that's been around a championship team for a very long time. A championship team that is now defined by how good their defense is week in and week out. The best defensive coordinator or one of in the league. Go grab him. Take him away. Make your rival worse. Figure out some of what they've made in that special sauce, Kansas City, and see if that can turn the Raiders culture around. That would be one of my – I'd have to take a long look at Spags if I could.
I tell you, of the 5 teams left, Vegas has the most cap space. They have like $85 million. They have money to work with. So that being said, Jason, Aaron Glenn is going to interview with the Jets and the Saints. The Jets have like $15 million cap space. The Saints are way over the cap. Now you have until the beginning of the year, the league year, which is in March, to be under the cap, but they have a lot of space to make up, do the Saints. And Derek Carr said he's not going to take a pay cut. So comparing those two jobs for Aaron Glenn as part of the information, where would you go if you're Aaron Glenn?
Yeah, I think you have a better chance of winning with the Jets in some ways because of the way that what you just mentioned, their structure. But the Saints understand they're in a complete rebuild. They understand that it's going to be a minute, and they're in a division that looks much more winnable than trying to go in there and figure out how to take down Buffalo. Guys, I think Buffalo has proven that they're a juggernaut at this point. Every year we try and lay the Buffalo Bills to rest, and every year they come out and have a year where they just surprise everybody. I think the death of the Bills is the annually overreported story in the NFL. So I don't know that I love being in the same division as the Bills, frankly, for the Jets, but I do think that given the cap space, given you're tied to Derek Carr, given the fact that there's just a lot of needs on the Saints roster, top to bottom, I think the Jets is actually a more appealing job.
Yeah, and given the ingredients you already has to work with on the defensive side of the ball, where we know even though you're the CEO, the side of the ball that you represent is always one that you are judged off of to some extent, especially when things go wrong. A lot to work with there, certainly, that would give him that opportunity. And it sounds like by all right, let's finish off this hellscape of a show here with this, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off into the rest of the day where I'm going to try and take care of my very, very stressed out mental health. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern here on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to the GoJo and Golic YouTube channel where you can drink the sweet milk of my tears after Notre Dame lost the national championship or celebrate Ohio State, whatever you choose to do here. Thank you to our guest today, Joe Thomas, the Hall of Famer, for joining us to talk about the NFL's last 4 teams, and to our buddy Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports for helping us break down the CFP run overall and look ahead at some of the coaching openings around the NFL as Ben Johnson taking the Bears job, the latest news there. If you missed any of that, check it out wherever you get our podcast or right here on the YouTube channel as soon as we're done with the show. Guys, let's start off with this. Dad, we mentioned this a little bit in the show, but more coaching news around the NFL as we're starting to just get into the musical chairs portion of events here. The Indianapolis Colts, who had fired their defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley, after their season where they, over his tenure, had never ranked higher than 24th in points allowed during this 24 regular season, have now replaced him with former Bengals defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. Dad, you had to cover this Bengals team this season. Obviously, personnel-wise, they hadn't drafted well on that side of the ball. How much blame did Lou Anarumo deserve from that as he now heads over to try and give Colts fans some hope with their defense coming up?
Well, I mean, you look for a coordinator to scheme up if you don't have the talent on the field, right? So I think it's you can't point to one thing. You can't just say, oh, Lou didn't have players, though he didn't have players. He had Trey Hendrickson. That was about it. But you then have to scheme up players, whether by injury. If you have a bunch of injuries, you may have to scheme different, like Detroit losing Aiden Hutchinson. All of a sudden, Aaron Glenn went to a little more blitz package, and you have to create the X's and O's in the game plan to make up for deficiencies. So there's plenty of blame to go around. I think Lou's a good coach, but it hasn't panned out the last couple of years in Cincinnati. He'll take over for Gus Bradley, who was let go by the Colts. And a lot of these coordinators, if they don't become head coaches, they just kind of shift around to teams. And we talked about the possibility of Notre Dame's D coordinator, Al Golden, being maybe one of the top choices to go to Cincinnati. And I know Al, but I don't know Al's personal situation of, does he want to be, a coach in the NFL? We know he was a head coach in college. Another name you wonder in this new cycle going to the NFL if a team needs an offensive coordinator, you don't hear Chip Kelly's name. Chip Kelly did a hell of a job at Ohio State, right? It stopped being the head coach at UCLA to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. Got the chip ring, right? Got the natty. Now you wonder, I haven't heard his name being bantered about as any offensive coordinator jobs in the NFL. I wonder if that will change.
Yeah, or head coaching jobs around college. I mean, we know what Kelly was behind in UCLA, even as they were moving over to the Big Ten, but there's no doubt he is one of the massive stories coming off this run for them and the job that he did overall. I'm sure going to get noticed much in the same way Al Golden will. Al Golden, who was in Cincinnati in 2020, 2021 as the linebacker coach there. So some familiarity as well. He also coached tight ends and linebackers for the Lions in the late aughts. Yeah. So someone who, like Chip Kelly, has experience in the NFL. And we've seen plenty in the recent years. Jeff Hafley, the current defensive coordinator for the Packers, also coming over from the college ranks here. Plenty of connective tissue, which is always going to lead back to opportunity when you see these guys accomplish in that way. So again, Lou Anarumo, the new defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts here. Jesse, let's get to that and the Dodgers' continued spending rampage.
Yeah, so they landed Tanner Scott over the weekend. And guys, there's a tweet out there that talks about all the contracts, active contracts they have, all the deferred money that they have right now. Look at this tweet. Okay, there's a lot of big numbers here. Obviously, Shohei has the biggest number, but you go down through this list. Let me tell you what the total is. $1.375 billion, okay? That is higher than the GDP of 12 countries in the world. So the Dodgers have that money there, about that life. That's just ridiculous.
Well, and keep in mind, that is the number of deferred dollars on these deals, Dad, coming up that include the likes of, obviously, Shohei Ohtani's $680 million deferred is the bulk of that, but Mookie Betts $115 million deferred, Blake Snell $66 million, Freddie Freeman $57, Will Smith $50 million. We know that was sort of the novelty that we saw here when we went through free agency this last time around, but Dad, to see the trend sparked here in large part by Shohei Ohtani with the Dodgers team that just keeps stacking talent, they're putting a lot of distance between themselves and everybody else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you just literally cut that number in half if Shohei Ohtani does. I mean, he deferred $680 million. It's unheard of. And it comes down to a choice of a player. All these players deferring this money, normally you want the money now because you want the money working for you. But if you take the money now, you also have the thought process, if you don't have a good money person, you spend your money now. How many times do you hear of players going broke? Now, going broke in today's world would be unheard of with the money that they're making, but getting the money right away, having it work for you is a positive. Getting the money right away and overspending is obviously a negative. Knowing that money, like Shohei Ohtani is getting the $680 million from age 44 to 54, I believe. I mean, to know that money is coming in, what a security blanket. And for all these players, it's just different denominations, knowing that years after they're done playing, they have money coming in. So it's just a matter of how you want the money working for you. Normally, you would want it all. Like Juan Soto, he didn't want to defer any money.
Yeah.
So he wasn't looking to defer. He took it all with the Mets.
I look at this less from a personal finance standpoint and more from what it's allowing the Dodgers to do. We know in a league without a cap, the way they can stack talent and the way that you can spend cash on hand when these guys are allowing you the opportunity to hold on to more of that here in the immediacy is going to get to a point where Major League Baseball has always had this, right? Whether it's been the Yankees, any of the other coastal elites, and trying to make this happen here. We're going to get to that point soon where I'm sure the headlines are going to be, are the Dodgers bad for baseball in what they're doing and hoarding talent right now on a team that already showed you, even without their star player going out here and being the two-way star he's been, they can lift the trophy and be the one at the top of the heap. Jesse, speaking of lifted trophies, let's get to the third here and maybe the one thing that went wrong for Ohio State last night.
Yeah, so their celebrations hit a momentary bump, okay, after the game. So a golf cart carrying Ryan Day, Will Howard, and Cody Simon, they were being driven in the golf cart to the post-game presser after the celebrations and everything. A staffer drove the golf cart, as you can see in this video, directly into a wall. Okay, so she was trying to execute a three-point turn. I don't know what's going on in this video. That wall came out of nowhere, but she just slams into the wall. Nobody was hurt. Everybody gets out of the golf cart. Everybody's kind of like laughing, but now they got to start walking, guys.
Yeah, it's a lot of shades of gray in that wall and in that floor over there that I'm seeing, which might be the trouble. Because, Dad, I don't know if she was going for the K-turn as much as it was just misjudging the turning radius of this very long golf cart.
Yeah, because I think she could have backed up and gone, but I think she messed up the front wheel because she hit that wall harder than I thought. I agree. I think she just thought she could make the turn and just completely racked that front right tire to where, because you saw her try and turn the wheel to back up to go out, but it wasn't moving, so that cart was definitely damaged.
Oh yeah, the sound there was that front right wheel separating from the rest of the axle and going off on its own there. And the sound after that was the steps that Ryan Day, Will Howard, and company were going to have to take to the podium because that thing wouldn't do no more.
You know what would have been worse? The only thing worse than that is if it were Marcus Freeman, Riley Leonard, and Jeremiah Love after a loss, and they were being driven back to the locker room after on-field loss interviews, and they crashed the golf cart. That would have been adding insult to injury.
Truly, yeah.
It is just about Ohio State coaches and golf carts, though, although I think they would take this one in victory over sad Urban Meyer eating pizza on the back of a golf cart as the visual for the Buckeyes, as they are, again, your 2024-25 college football playoff national champions, the first in the expanded 12-team playoff era, righting the wrongs of the Michigan loss. They are the ones holding the pen, writing the